Hi, and welcome to the Your Story Studios podcast, a podcast where we talk about all things content creation. And today on the show, I'm joined by Daniel, and today we are talking about gear. Daniel, tell me about your gear.
So at the moment, the only cameras I own is my Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro. That's my go-to if someone's like, hey, can you quickly go out and shoot this thing for me, and I'm going to be editing it, just because it's cheap, it's nimble. I like the image quality out of it. I have been a colorist in the past for agency work and that sort of thing, so I like being able to have that raw image and being able to manipulate it in Resolve however I like. But I've also hung on to my little A7 Mark III and my 5D Canon 5D Mark II. The Canon 5D Mark II hang on is more of a sentimental thing. It's Magic Lantern RAW hacked, so it does shoot DNG RAW, but I use it for time lapses predominantly now as just kind of a C camera. And then the A7, just because it's so good in low light, I've just hung on to that for in case I've got a corporate gig that's in some sort of blackened out sort of Jeff's shed in the city where there's no, lights and you just have to make it work. All my glass is pretty much Canon EF mount glass at the moment, but you've caught me right at the point of wanting to kind of sell everything and pivot into one sort of ecosystem, because I'm just at that point where I've just been hanging on to stuff that just kind of needs a bit of a clean out and a bit of a shape up really. So, well,
let's talk about that. Where are you looking to pivot?
So the confusing thing for me is that I operate at both ends of the video spectrum. So last week I was cutting content that was shot on an iPhone for an agency that just needs to go out onto socials. 2 weeks prior to that, I was shooting on the Canon 500 for another corporate gig. A few weeks prior to that, I was shooting on the Red, but I shoot literally on everything. So from like highly specialized cameras like the Phantom, shooting really high speed, I've shot on those, down to kind of DSLR stuff.
How do you get your hands on the Phantom?
So Phantom was through a guy based out of Adelaide that shoots predominantly surf films. We managed to get that through him for a project I did with Thank You Water. So we shot this TV commercial that was all shot on the Phantom Flex. So we took that camera over to Cambodia, had it in a waterproof housing so we could shoot these high-speed frames with people kind of throwing water around and playing in fields with water and kind of just showcasing how these people have gone from having access to no water to an abundance of clean drinking water. That camera is not particularly designed to be out of the water when in a waterproof housing. It runs really, really hot. So we had ice bags packed on it to try and cool it, and we'd get sort of a 4-second take, and then we'd have to wait for it to load onto the drives and then cool the camera down and kind of do this sort of bizarre workflow. But
because that version of the Phantom, how many frames does it go up to?
That's a very good question. I think that one, I'd be guessing, I'd say it was like 1,000 frames a second. Yeah, something like that. I mean, now they shoot up to like millions. Like it's,
really?
Like they're...
I haven't kept track.
Yeah, I haven't kept track. There's going to be a lot of things on this gear check where you're going to have to like fact check me. Yeah. Have like a disclaimer underneath, because as I said, I've literally been, for the last 3 years, I've been predominantly editing. And then when I've been hired out as a cinematographer, I just hire kit. I've got a really good relationship with a friend, Josh Jansen, who runs a production company called Full Stack Films. They have a gear truck that is fully stocked with everything I could ever want, and I have the keys to the truck, so I can just grab that and take that and go.
How do we get keys to this truck?
That's right. Yeah, I'll get you in contact. But he's a very, very generous guy. He's got his kit predominantly is Desio lenses, Canon C300, C70, all Canon sort of stuff. An easy rig, Intelitech lights, a couple of Amaran lights, it's kind of a great little truck. So for kind of middle to upper corporate work, I'd just jump on that truck. Lower end stuff, I'm shooting on my Pocket, and then the much higher end stuff, it then goes to Alexa or to Red. Is kind of I love the look of the Red, so I kind of tend to jump to a Komodo or something that's still quite lightweight and nimble. Those are kind of my go-to cameras. So in terms of what I'm looking at to buy, my main thing that's restricting me on the corporate side is the lack of autofocus. I've got a Ronin RS2 that I use, which I've managed to set up with the Blackmagic Pocket, but it's a very heavy rig. You have to have the counterbalanced weights to make it work. I've got the Raven 3D to be able to kind of have some autofocus, but it's a bit janky and not particularly reliable.
LiDAR.
Yeah, the LiDAR system. It's their version 1 of that LiDAR system. So it works, but it only works through the Ronin app. So there's just a whole bunch of restrictions with it.
A lot of gotchas.
A lot of gotchas, yeah. So it's not as run and gun as I would like, but it does work for some cinema work. So I shot second unit on the Giants, which is now on Netflix, that was done with that pocket camera. I bought an aftermarket kit to be able to mount PL lenses on it. So we had Cooke anamorphic lenses running on that camera. And it's beautiful. It looks great. Cuts really well with the Alexa, cuts really well with the red. But that camera is kind of in that weird world of the data management side's really frustrating. The file sizes are huge and you'd be it doesn't have that Canon world which is why I love the C300 of a much more efficient sort of codec. So yeah, I'm kind of in this space of, it's probably going to end up being either the Sony world, the latest, whatever that will be, or the latest Canon world. But I do ideally want something full frame. I want something with autofocus, and I really want something with built-in NDs because they're probably my key things where I just need to be able to control those things really fast. Yep.
Yeah. Do you have a budget in your head?
Oh, it's probably going to be around 15. Yeah, 15 to 20 it would be the ideal budget. If we're just talking, what I would want to spend, it would just be whatever's the cheapest.
Yeah. Because there's always something that you need to buy.
Yeah.
Is what I've found. Do you know how many cameras you'd be looking at getting? Would it just be that one single camera
just the
that
one,
does everything?
Yeah. Because
that one perfect camera that totally exists.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because at the moment, the way my kit's laid out is it's just in one Pelican case. I've got kind of 3 primes, which are behind me. So I've got some prime lenses that are cheap and nasty, but I love the look of them. They're nice and soft. They open right up to 1.4. And I've got a couple of art series lenses. I love the Sigma for just how sharp and soft they are, that full off that they have. But yeah, it's the challenge of trying to find that one camera. The annoying thing is like the stuff on YouTube I look at that I love is so in the DSLR run and gun world. But the thing I really hate about that world is the lack of onboard audio function, and often not having built-in NDs is a really big issue, especially for documentary. Because when it is that run and gun and going from internal scenes with no light to full sun external, I just want to be able to quickly flick something and then have it work. So
it's called the shutter button.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what I've been doing.
Yeah, okay. So you're doing
a lot of social stuff because I did obey the 180 degree shutter rule for quite a long time. So I'm screwing on my variable NDs onto my mirrorless camera that doesn't have a built-in ND system. But then I was like, you know what? Crank the shutter. Who cares about motion blur? My client doesn't care.
Yeah.
And as long as I get the shot and it's exposed properly, then it's fine. And I haven't really hated the results. I mean, you look at it sometimes and go, it would be nice to have a little bit of motion blur. But I'm probably one of the rare people that are looking at it going, oh, where's the motion blur? Because we're so used to not necessarily seeing motion blur on social content because people are using their phones and all that kind of stuff, which gets rid of the motion blur. I've kind of gone away from needing to have the built-in NDs on my mirrorless cameras, but what I love about the Sony FX6 is it has the built-in NDs. It goes up to 7 stops, so not the most amount. I think Canon goes up to 10 stops, so you get a few more stops, but Sony has the electronic variable ND where you can be shooting outside, and if you have it set up correctly, if you're shooting on a partly cloudy day and the sun's going in and out behind clouds and it's sunny and then a little bit darker and then sunny again, it will manually and in tiny increments change the ND. So you're keeping your aperture, you're keeping your shutter speed as well. The ND is just changing bit by bit to have a usable shot. Whereas with Canon, yes, they've got the built-in NDs, but they're hard stops. So you're constantly going to be changing it and the shot won't necessarily be usable.
Yeah.
So that's one of the great party tricks of the Sony FX6. So if you're looking at getting a Sony camera or going into that system, great. And then it also has a whole bunch of other things with built-in audio that, from my understanding, better than Canon because I use the dual channel audio receiver and that goes into the hot shoe because I've got a little adapter, and then that means I can have 2 channels of audio going directly into the Sony FX6, and then it's also got 2 XLR inputs as well, so I can then plug physically into the handle two more sources of audio. So on the one record, I can have up to 4 channels of audio going at once, which is great. So yeah, there's lots of little things like that that makes, for me and the shoots that I do, makes it really good.
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of people shifting towards the Sony. Like even so, Josh, who runs Full Stack Films, he's currently working on his first feature doco, and he has, as I said, this whole camera truck. They shot in the States, so it would have been hard to bring the truck over. But he's all in the Canon ecosystem, but they've chosen to shift to Sony for that shoot, partly because that's what the DP likes to work with, but also the codecs much more manageable. I think their total data footprint for the project is, it's like one film. The film I'm working on, Floodlands, we're at almost 60 terabytes for that project because we've shot Canon RAW. And they've done about 50 days of shooting for that project. Josh has done, I think, somewhere around 30 days, maybe a little bit more, 30, 40. And I think their project size is about 10 terabytes or something like that, just because of how efficient the codec is. So that's a huge part of my consideration with what I'm looking to now purchase, because one of the biggest pains of the Blackmagic is the file size. It's just so huge, and no client ever likes to discuss paying for the hard drive or the multiple backups that are needed to keep it safe, or, that whole element of just, keeping archive media. I mean, just before I finished my production company, we made a really large investment in a server that would allow 4 editors to edit off the one red RAW file at the same time. So we needed quite a fast throughput for that. So I think it cost us about $40,000 to get this 100 terabyte server system that we could expand, and it was going to be this great thing. But then a couple of years later, I decided I didn't want to do the production company anymore. So we folded the production company. Well, now that server's sitting in my office at home, probably worth about $8,000, maybe $5,000, because who wants to buy secondhand hard drives and a secondhand storage system? No one. So it's of more value for me to hang on to it because it's got 100 terabytes of client data. And now it's this, but I could have all of that data so greatly reduced if I was on the Sonys, or if I had gone a different route for all the number of projects that have been filmed over the years on that whole Blackmagic system and the Red system and, Alexa and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I think a lot of DPs and people don't think about in terms of the whole production process of that data footprint. Because often you can get so, dialed in on thinking I just want the best image quality, which on this latest documentary, that was their mindset. So they were shooting Canon RAW at kind of the highest level. But it actually only meant that they could roll for 10 minutes at a time given the CFast cards that they had. And so all the production restrictions that come into play purely for data purposes. And it looks great, and it's going to be great for the colorists to have these files to work with. But arguably they could have gone, the Canon sort of more efficient route, which is what GLOP, there's an abbreviation of it, but it's basically the compressed file, the internal compressed file. Longop, that's it, Longop, yeah.
I've found that with my Sony cameras, S-Log 3, 10-bit, 422, great. I don't need to shoot RAW, and the file sizes can vary. I always use on my FX6 the XAVC-I codec, but it also has
the intra or the
it's the higher one.
Yeah.
And then it's also got an XAVC-L, which is the more compressed. But if you're shooting log, you don't want to do the compressed, because when you throw the LUT on and then start moving stuff around, 8-bit versus 10-bit, there is a big difference. So I've learnt that from mistakes. But yeah, I've found that is a perfectly usable codec and setup for me for the types of video projects that I do. I don't need to shoot RAW. I don't need to have that massive amount of flexibility. And I do find that 10-bit 422 has a lot of flexibility as well for me to get the shots that I need. So yeah, I'm really happy with that.
Yeah. Well, especially if you're for some commercial work, I have a little small HD monitor with LUTs that I can load up on that. So I've made some LUTs that get me in the ballpark of what I would want an image to look like. So for really fast turnover projects, I'm forced to just kind of use that LUT and to kind of either chat to the colorist and say, hey, look, just whack some dehancer on it to kind of give it some film grain, or, polish it up a little bit. But 9 times out of 10, they might just end up using the LUT. And so even that as a practice has kind of been a good thing to go, you can actually, if you're really conscious of the lighting and what you're actually doing, and you have the mind for that on set, you kind of need to shoot in a way, especially if you're handing footage off, to kind of go, this is what it is and this is what I would like it to be. Because especially on fast turnover projects, you don't have the luxury of going in to sit on a color timing session and to grade with people. So for stuff that is my own stuff, though, I do enjoy that process and being able to push it a bit further and trying to manipulate it more. So that was the original reason for going down the Blackmagic path. But at this point in my career and with what I'm doing, I just don't want to have to manage all the data side. So I'm trying to consolidate and look at ways of simplifying it all.
Yeah, the data is really something that we do overlook a lot.
It's so painful. Like the amount of production companies I work with where they're like, oh, yeah, the hard drives, and it's like spread across multiple things. And thankfully, this latest documentary I'm working on, they had the wisdom from my past experience and their past experience to rent a server from a comp now. I have a really great contact, Tony Core, who deals with a lot of big agencies in Melbourne, a lot of big production companies. We've rented a 60 terabyte server off of him that multiple people can edit from. And then we've got these little Stardom RAID systems that have 60 terabytes each on them. So we've got a triple backup of the whole project. And then once the project's done, he'll get his server back, and then we'll just have the 2 RAIDs that'll exist to kind of archive that media. But yeah, on projects of that nature where it's a narrative, a feature documentary, you have to have 3 backups for the insurance. So that way if one goes down, everything's kind of safe. But when you're doing run and gun stuff, you can be so tempted just to leave it on even the SSD that you've shot on, cut it, and then archive it onto something. But it's just the bane of everyone's existence is data management, I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, I like being able to shoot for an agency, hand off the footage, and then not have to worry about it.
Yeah, because what are you doing for this? Like, how are you backing up everything? Are you just backing up at the end output, or you're keeping all the rushes?
Yeah, so I'll have a couple of backups while the episodes are being edited. So if one drive goes down, I go to the other drive, and then it's still there. And then at the end, after it's been finalized, premiered and all that kind of stuff, I've got another or I've got a hard drive where I keep all the finals, all final renders and thumbnails, and that's it.
Yep, and then you delete the rest. Yep,
because it's hundreds of gigabytes for an episode like this. For a shoot with my different guests, we might do pulling back the curtain right now. We do batch records, so 2 or 3 episodes, and with all the multiple cameras and all that kind of stuff, it works out to be about 300 gigabytes or so per guest, and that starts to add up. And then I don't really want to be having multiple hard drives and all that. So yeah, I've just simplified it. Once the episodes have been finalized and all that, I then delete the raw footage, and the amount of gigabytes that then need to be backed up significantly drops.
Yeah. Because it's such a good on you for actually having the discipline to do that, because so many people don't. One of the things I'm trying to do is because I'm going through the process of redoing my show reel and website at the moment, I'm going back and looking at a lot of old client data, and I'm trying to be in the mindset of, okay, this is, because you can be so tempted to look at that stuff and go, oh, someday I'll go through and sort it out. Well, now I'm going through and sorting it out and just outputting a master file that has a multi-track output. So that way I've got just the VO on one track, I've got just the sound effects on another, and I've got the music on another. So if that client was like, hey, can I edit that thing? I've got this master file where I could actually just kind of tweak it a little bit. And I think I'm going to end up doing the same as just deleting all the old media, because it's just, literally 100 terabytes on one server, but then I've maybe got 40 or 50 portable drives that are sitting in boxes of, with 15 years worth of content on it. So, yeah, and they're not going to last, because the other thing with these drives is that you can pick them up, 8 years down the line, plug them in, and then they don't turn on.
I've had that happen.
Yeah.
Stuff from my uni days. I've got these old Western Digital hard drives, spinning hard drives, and I've only got one copy of the files. This was before I became a professional and realized you need to have at least 2 backups. I've heard the saying 3 is 2, 2 is 1, 1 is none.
Exactly.
So if you've only got one copy or one thing of your footage, you don't have your footage. You need to have at least 2.
And people go, oh, really? Like that's so expensive. On this documentary Floodland that I've just been working on, our office flooded, ironically. Maybe a month ago, we had this big rainstorm in Melbourne. One of the gutters overflowed and ended up gushing through our wall into our edit suite and completely drenching one of our backup drives. Thankfully, it was on the side of the room where the server wasn't. So our primary server was fine. But luckily, every night I do a cloud backup of project files. And then once a week, I do a carbon copy cloner to the 3 sort of systems. So there's kind of one single point of truth, which is the server, and then that point of truth gets mirrored to 2 backups, and then those backups get taken to 2 completely separate sites. So I have one at home, and then the director has one at his home, because it can sound silly when you're talking about it in pre-production meetings. Oh, but if, the place catches fire or it floods, and like, oh, I guess so.
What are the odds of that?
What are the odds? And then it happens, and people go, thank God you've actually done this in a proper way. But try and tell that to a corporate client that's got minimum budget and doesn't want to pay the money for, $500 for a hard drive. And you're asking for 3. So, it can also become a complicated conversation around copyright, because then it's like, for my production company, the way we managed our copyright was that they would own the copyright of the end product, but not of what we shot. So that would give us some control over what would end up in the final thing. And then, because especially for a lot of sporting companies I used to shoot for, we shoot hours of landscapes and cyclists and riders, and that stuff's great stock for other, clients. And so we wanted to retain the copyright on that, because they weren't also paying us to kind of do those extra scenery shots and that sort of thing. So they own the copyright of the end product, but not of the media that was required to get there. But then I'm asking them to pay to store all of that media that was required to get there. So it can be a bit of a convoluted thing of how does that financially work to charge and all those sorts of things. So
that's a difficult one.
Yeah, which is part of the production process that if you're just shooting, you don't really think about all that stuff. But because I'm kind of across the whole thing, all these things really, really play a role in like what camera I'm going to end up buying and deciding to go with. So yeah.
So to finish off the episode, have you come to any conclusions on what system you want to go with? Canon, Sony, stay with Blackmagic, and just pray. Oh, you'll have to wait probably a while for autofocus. But what are you thinking?
At this stage, it's probably leaning towards the Sony. I love Canon glass. I've always been a Canon user. My very first camera was a Canon 7D, and then I got the 5D, and I've kind of just been in that world for a long, long time. But the work that I'm seeing come out from people that are using the Sony systems and stuff, I'm just really enjoying at the moment from what I'm seeing online. So that's leaning me towards that. But then Canon's just come out with this new full frame camera that also looks very enticing. It's on the upper end of the budget that I would want to spend, but for the more cinematic part of what I do, that camera seems perfect.
The C400.
The C400, yeah.
And they've just brought out the C80 as well, which seems to be very similar to the C400 minus a couple of things like it's one less SDI output or something like that, and maybe some codecs. So if you're looking at getting the cheaper version, I'm sure you'd probably still be really happy with the C80. But then I'm sure there's a whole bunch of different quirks and gotchas that you don't find out until you actually get it in your hands and start using it and go, oh, I wish it did this. Oh, I should have got the more expensive one.
Yeah. Well, for this camera truck that I use a lot, we have the C300 and the C70, and it looks like it's the same relationship with those two that you're describing. And yeah, the C70 just gets a look in if we need a B cam for interviews. Otherwise, it pretty much just sits in the truck. So yeah, it's one of those things, but it's an endless thing and it's one of those people always like, oh, it's not about the gear. And I really do think the gear is so important. Like some of my favorite stuff I've shot is because I had the Cook lenses and the nice camera, and it got me to the place that I wanted to be because it was what my reference images all used. So I think gear is really, really important. But then at the same time, there's been a little group of people that have gone to sort of the Alexa level of content. And sometimes I look at what they were shooting on, their Sony A7s, and I'm like, I actually like the Sony A7 more because they're in a better position and more nimble, especially for doco, able to kind of keep rolling and not be so precious. And so, yeah.
Yeah, because like an Alexa, it's a big camera, whereas a Sony mirrorless camera, it's a lot smaller and you can get different angles and be maybe a little bit more inconspicuous if you're doing doco or stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely, gear does play a big part in the whole video production process and also just getting the shot as well.
Yeah, no, hugely. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it all lands. But right now I'm at the point of just wanting to sell everything and just kind of simplify it down to one system. So I'm definitely going to talk to you more about it for sure.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll have you back on an episode and you can bring in the new camera system.
Yes, yeah, that'll be fun. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Daniel, for joining us on the Your Story Studios podcast and talking about your camera gear.
Thank you for having me.